John and I have known each other for 27 years now, and I think of myself as an old UFO fart who's been at this a long time. He's one of the few in the world who's been at it longer than I have. Our paths have intertwined a number of different times over the past 27 years. And for 76 years since the beginning of the modern UFO era, when you think about this topic, if you think about it at all, the dominant paradigm has always been these are spacecraft from other planets. They're ETs. Both John and I probably started in that spot a long time ago. Both of our opinions have shifted quite dramatically in the decades since. And tonight we thought we might tell you the factors that went into what changed our opinions, where it's headed, tell you some goofy stories about Skinwalker Ranch, and then sort of come full circle about the amazing events that are unfolding right now. I mean, normally in this UFO world, things happen at a pace that is like tectonic plates moving or glaciers, pretty slowly. But the last 5.5 years have been pretty remarkable. We've had 3 congressional hearings. They went 54 years without any of them, and then they had 3 of them in the last 3 years. Congress has authorized 3 different UFO programs, the UAP task force, something called AIMSOG, and something called AARO. I promise we won't bury you with too many acronyms tonight. NASA has its own program going. The Galileo project based at Harvard is going. Mainstream media, which avoided this like the plague for a long time, is now sort of on board with covering it to some extent. A lot of it's debunking. But it's been a remarkable series of changes in a short amount of time. And for those of us like John and I have been at this for a long time, it's amazing. I mean, I never thought I would see this kind of change in my lifetime. We don't exactly know where it's going, but we're going to give you some ideas about where we think it might be headed next.
I'd like to say catching up with UFOs at the moment is kind of like trying to jump on a freight train that's at full speed already, because it is changing dramatically. What I wanted to do initially is we started talking about reality denied, which is broader. And I start all of my presentations with this slide. We could do hours. By the way, I'll apologize up front. I'm going to go, it's kind of like a fire hose for a few minutes, then we're going to slow down. But the topics that we'll talk about will be available for questioning. This is a bias that I have and have used this for a long time. All of these phenomena, in my view, are interrelated in some way, and consciousness appears to be a part of it. And I've been involved in research in all of these areas. Go to a lot of conferences, and these are some that I've presented at. And it's interesting when you have UFOs, near-death experiences, been with shamans in the Amazon, as I said, in remote viewing. It's kind of interesting how they tend to see these things as separate and distinct. But what's merging now over time is we're more understanding that these are interrelated. Tonight, we're we're going to hit predominantly initially on UAPs or UFOs and Skinwalker Ranch. Understand they have not done anything on Skinwalker here before, and these are a couple of the books that George is a co-author on. I have some available here. It says reality denied is much, much broader. I'll start with voodoo. First of all, voodoo is far more than a religion. Everything you've seen about it on TV and that, forget about that. It's an entire way of life. And my point here is, this had to do with fire, where they stand on the fire, sit in the fire, and things that just defy the laws of thermodynamics. This is in Eastern Africa, where we're working with shamans there. I've been in with the reindeer shaman. This is in Mongolia. By the way, there was an article in New York Times just this past weekend talking about adventure travel and ending in Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar is where we started there. The 2 pictures that I've shown in there, in the upper one, these are things that were reported. We haven't got time to get into it, but that's one where we woke up one morning on the Siberian border, and next day laying between us is a 50 pence Australian coin. The other is an airport that just emerged with the Shaman Bold, who's the one that you see there, just dropped out of sight. I've done a lot of work with ayahuasca, and we can address that, but the bottom line is psychopharmacology does not explain all of the things that we have seen there. This is another one. We were in Curitiba, Brazil, and my wife, this is a spirit possession full up. Now, these people are used to seeing spirit possession, and this is Umbanda, and by the way, in there in Contemplé, no drugs involved at all. But there were about 300 people there, only about 10 gringos, and she's suddenly out. That's why you see everybody standing around looking at her. I mean, that was very unusual. Can talk about that. John of God, highly controversial, particularly at the moment. Just got sentenced to 118 years in jail. But the healings that we have seen there, we've been in Abydinia, just pretty amazing. More recently, we were in the stands. So here's where we saw in the Tian Shan Mountains in Kyrgyzstan, dealing with shamans there. On the left is Samarkand in Uzbekistan. The bottom picture, that's an eagle, a hunting eagle on my arm. I just threw that in, it was kind of neat. And if you don't know anything about the gates of hell, I highly do not recommend Turkmenistan as a place to visit, but that is an interesting site. Of course, we have remote viewing. I think you've had, I know Samson Schwartz has been here. I was on the founding board of the International Remote Viewing Association. On my doctorate, the head of my doctorate committee was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whom some will know. She's the one who basically brought hospice to the U.S., and that led me to becoming the president of IONS later. Not related to unusual phenomena, but we also ended up creating something called Children's Hospice International. The first time we were dealing with pediatric hospice. A key medium that was involved was Ann Gaiman. And there, what happened was that we were first doing the metal bending, soft spoon bending, and she's sitting across from my boss, who was the commanding general of Intelligence and Security Command, holding up a fork, and it went bloop. That really got our attention. I understand Suzanne Gaiman has been here. Interesting medium. By the way, the relationship with her and Anne, her first book that she wrote was actually The Priest and the Medium. Also, interspecies communication. I've worked with dolphins in the wild. The lower side, that's with the humpback whales in the open ocean, and at distances like this, I mean, within inches, amazing. And orbs, and we're going to talk, I know more about the orb thing in the future. And then most recently, we were in eastern Turkey, and some of you may have heard of Göbekli Tepe, which is sort of developed. Problem is that it's about 11,000 years old, and nobody can figure out where this came from. This site is even newer and potentially bigger. It's Karahan Tepe. Is probably 2 millennia older than Göbekli Tepe, and the question becomes, where the problem here is it's only about 1% excavated so far. They have no idea where, how big it's going to be, and more or less who put it there. And finally, what I'm going to say is one of the big issues of the question is, how much is enough? And I would say here in the near-death studies, we have millions of cases, and people want to argue, can this be real or not? In the remote viewing, scientists argue about the theoretical aspects of, can this be true? We had an operational capability that was in there. And finally, what we're going to talk about a lot tonight is in the UFO arena. Again, many occasions when we get into the military, basically every sensor system we have picks them up. And people still want to argue, is this real or not? One of the things I argue is that these phenomena are at least as complex as cancer. And if we're going to address these issues, we need to get our best and brightest involved and be able to do so without risking their reputation or livelihood. So, George, why don't you tell them about what's happening?
All right. I'll tell you a little bit my entry to this topic. So I live in Las Vegas. It's the best news town in America, maybe in the world. We have so much crime and corruption and money and power, celebrities, sports stars, big events, con men, con artists, scam artists of every type, big dreamers, people who moved there for a second chance in life. I mean, it's a great city. There's never been a slow news day. I've covered every kind of imaginable crime and corruption and scandals you can imagine. I got hooked into UFOs one day in 1987 when somebody walked in the news station with a stack of documents and tried to get my managing editor interested. He pushed it away, said it sounded too crazy. If it was true, he'd already know about it. I said, let me take a look at those things. And they had been, most of them were FOIA documents squeezed out of the federal government, the military in particular, intelligence agencies, through the Freedom of Information Act. This is what hooked me on the story about UFOs, because the dominant paradigm, again, the idea that the public has that these are extraterrestrial craft visiting from other planets, is in direct contradiction to what our government has told us for a long time. Nothing to it, nothing to see here, folks, move along. Well, the paper trail shows something different. Before FOIA became the law of the land in the mid-1970s, these memos, reports, and very candid comments went back and forth between different parts of the government. The US Army, the US Air Force, the Navy, the CIA, and other agencies would comment back and forth very candidly about these encounters that were happening. They said, these are not ours. We don't believe they're Russians. They're from somewhere else. We need to figure this out. It's a matter of national security. They would be very candid about that. Now, after FOIA became the law of the land, those same agencies became pretty good at hiding this stuff, either not putting it on paper or using vague, vacuous terms that wouldn't be picked up in FOIA, or hiding it in private hands so people like me couldn't get it. But that's what hooked me, because I could see that while our government and agencies were telling the public one thing, they were saying something very different, directly contradictory to that position in private. That's something that as a reporter I could dig my heels into and look, I can't go out and find UFOs in the night sky, although I've done that hundreds of times trying it, and I'm not smart enough to figure out the cosmic implications, but I figured I could dig my teeth into the paper trail as a way to get into the story. And I did this series of reports, first some interviews in '87, then in a series of UFO reports in '89 that just exploded. Part of those reports were about Area 51. And until those stories that we put on KLAS in 1989, most of the world had not heard about Area 51, unless people lived near it or had worked out there. But we really put it on the map, and now we've got the ET highway out there, we got the Little Alien, our baseball team was the Las Vegas 51s. I mean, it's the meme that launched 1,000 different products, video games, rock stars, rock bands, songs, poems, you name it. That was my start. And when I did that series, the first person outside of our newsroom that I told about it was a guy named Harry Reid. Harry Reid, I'd covered him in '82 and '84, his first runs for Congress. In '86, he ran for the US Senate. And I got to know him a little bit in covering it. And when I heard about this stuff about Area 51, he's the first person I told outside the newsroom. And he said, I'm interested in that. Keep me in the loop. That started a conversation, a private conversation that I had with him until the day he died, which is less than a year ago. I mention his name and one other one because they become key to how I met John, and it also becomes key to many of the events that are unfolding right now. They started in my little hometown of Las Vegas. The other person is, after we put those stories on, I get a call among the hundreds and thousands of phone calls, reaction from those who had seen the series, from a guy named Robert Bigelow. And I'd never heard of Robert Bigelow. Hold for Robert Bigelow. And he says, boy, I really like that stuff. I really would like to help you continue your research. And he was offering to give me financial help. I said, I can't do that. I'm working for the TV station. But a couple of weeks later, we got together, we struck up a friendship, and that friendship led to some amazing places. And it also led to a meeting of minds with Harry Reid that had dramatic effects on where this topic and how it's evolved. Get to know Robert Bigelow a little bit. In 1995, he had tried to give $1 million to UFO organizations. They were always crying that they had no money to do basic research. He gives them $1 million, puts it on the table and says, all you need to do is get along. Well, of course they could not. They hate each other. They fought like cats and dogs. And so he took the money back and created his own organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. John Alexander, Colonel Alexander, was one of the key right-hand man to Bigelow when this thing was created. The very first meeting they had of their science advisory board, they invited me to speak about Russia UFO files that we could talk about a little bit later. After I left that meeting, this science advisory board was so impressive. The makeup of the board, Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and Harrison Schmitt, the last man to walk on the moon, at the time was a US Senator from New Mexico, Dr. Jacques Vallée, an amazing, a couple of people who'd worked for the CIA as contractors on remote viewing and other strange programs like that. An amazing group. First person I told about NIDS was Harry Reid. And I was hoping he would ask, can I get an invitation? And that's exactly what happened. Harry Reid has a meeting of the minds with Bigelow. Some decade later, that partnership leads to the biggest government-funded UFO program in existence that we know of, something called OSAP. And that program studied Skinwalker Ranch. In 1996, the same year that NIDS started, Bigelow hears these rumors about this ranch property in Utah, northeastern Utah, up near Vernal, basically a haunted place. It had been a hotbed of UFO activity for more than a century. Basically, as long as humans had been in that part of the country, they'd been seeing strange things in the sky. Perhaps as far back as 1776, when these Spanish missionaries came through, and they have reports of strange things over their campfires at night. But the Indians, the Ute tribe, has this gigantic reservation there. They've been seeing strange stuff. The Mormon settlers, who were the primary white population, have been seeing strange stuff. And a science teacher named Junior Hicks, Joseph Junior Hicks, he had taught generations of school kids in that area about science. And as they would get older and see these things in the sky that everyone was seeing in the Uinta Basin, they would tell Junior Hicks about it, and he started compiling this amazing file of cases, incidents, drawings, sometimes photos. That file became the basis of a book in the 1970s called the Utah UFO Display, which established that Uinta Basin was in fact a UFO hotspot. Well, that is the background for Robert Bigelow getting interested in this so-called haunted ranch, because the word gets out. There'd been a little Associated Press story about the rancher and his family being basically tortured by these things that were happening on the property. But it wasn't just UFOs. Bigelow and John fly to the ranch, meet with the rancher. They had been there for 20 months. And when they moved in, it was their dream property, 570 acres, a beautiful place dominated by this massive sandstone ridge, a stark natural environment. There's water on one side that ran year-round. It was 3 homesteads all put together, a great place to raise high-end Simmental cattle, very expensive hybrid cattle. Well, the rancher and his family move in. His wife is a vice president of a bank. His 2 teenage kids are straight-A students. 20 months later, fast forward to when John and Bigelow arrive on the property, that family was falling apart. They were all sleeping at night on the floor in the same room for protection. The kids were on the verge of dropping out of school. The wife had lost her job. The rancher, who was a world-class hunter, big game hunter, expert, college-educated guy, had lost all these head of cattle, 14 head of cattle in the course of a number of months. But that wasn't the worst of it. He and his family came to believe they were under some kind of constant surveillance, that there was an intelligence on this property that kept messing with them. And it always seemed to be one step ahead. It knew what they were going to do before they did it. It started with small little things. You could call it like poltergeist type events. And you won't see this on the TV show that's going on now. The phenomenon has changed, but it happened to them, and it's well documented, and NIDS guys put us all this stuff together, which is sort of the basis of our book. But the rancher would be out digging post holes for a fence He's got a post hole digger, a heavy piece of equipment. He stops for a second, wipes his brow, takes a sip of water, looks around, it's gone. This thing is gone. And they found it 2 weeks later, 40 feet up in a cottonwood tree. The wife goes to town and buys enough groceries for the family for a couple of weeks. She brings it home, puts all the bags on the table, takes it out of the bags, puts it away in the cabinet, leaves the room, comes back, all the stuff's back in the bags. Frying pans would move around. She'd take a shower in the morning, same thing. Lock the door, put a towel and her hairbrush on the cabinet, but the door's locked, gets out of the shower, the towel and the hairbrush are gone. She finds a hairbrush later in the kitchen somewhere, the door's still locked. Really weird little stuff like that was happening to them, and they couldn't figure it out. Then they started seeing these little orbs, little white orbs at first floating around in the trees. Then they started seeing these red orbs that would go into their cattle and scare the hell out of these animals. And then they started seeing these blue things, they call blue meanies, we kind of call them, a little bit bigger than a softball. They looked like they were made out of glass, and there was a blue liquid that was percolating inside of them, swirling around. And these things would get close to their faces, the humans, and it would like literally drive them to their knees. It somehow touched the flight or fight center in the brain and scared the hell out of them. They started seeing creatures. Bigfoot type creatures. They started having the cattle mutilations. Cats got carved up. They'd see bulls, and not bulls, but cows walk into the snow, into a snowbank, the tracks end, cows gone. They started seeing them carved up at night. We'll give you an example of a calf incident that happened while the NIDS guys were on the property in a minute. The guy is, they're going close to going under financially. 14 really expensive animals they had lost. There's a day came when they had 4 bulls in their corral. These are 2,000-pound, big, strong, mean bulls, very expensive animals, and they're in the corral, which is right by the house where the family lives. Rancher and his wife say to each other, "We're driving into town to go get some supplies," and it's 15-minute drive. They say to each other, "Boy, if something happens to one of those bulls, we'll really go under. It'll be it." They come back a half hour later. All 4 of the bulls are gone. They jump out of the truck, looking around. What the hell happened to them? And just as an aside, they got a white trailer inside this corral that is locked up. Big thick wire that locks up the only door, and they use it to store tools and things like that. The rancher looks in the top of a grating at the top of this thing, just on the aside, and there's all 4 bulls crammed into this trailer, like in a trance. You couldn't get them in with a forklift. And there they all are. The door is still locked. Somehow they got into that trailer, and as soon as he yells to his wife, "Hey, they're here," they wake up out of this trance, start kicking the side of it, knocked the wall down, and got out. The corral, by the way, which is all metal bars, was totally magnetized by whatever technology got those bulls out of the corral and into that trailer. They had been seeing creatures since the first day they walked onto the property. Again, this is their first day, this is their dream property, they're going to live there for the rest of their lives. They're unpacking stuff and moving in, and they see this giant, is that a wolf, a dog? What is that? All across the pasture, this really big canine starts moving itself meandering across the pasture, getting closer to them. They see it's a wolf, and it's like just gigantic. This wolf, he figures, well, somebody must have a pet wolf here. And it comes closer and closer to the family. The rancher had said it had rained that day, and they could smell the wet dog smell. And I think he even touched it, the side of it, and it's caressing, walking around in between the family. The corral has these calves that they had just unloaded inside, and one of the calves sticks its nose out of the bars. This wolf leaps into the air, makes a big jump like 20 feet into the air, chomps its jaws down on this calf, and starts pulling it out of the corral. The rancher jumps into action. He grabs either it's an axe handle or a baseball bat and starts beating this wolf on the back, and he's beating it as hard as he can, and it's not flinching. It's not making a noise. It acts as if it's not even noticing what he's doing. His kid runs to the truck. He's got a .357 in the glove box, brings it over to Dad, and Dad starts popping off shots at this wolf, and it's not moving. It's not reacting at all. His dad, the grandfather, goes into the house, comes out with a
elk rifle.
He shoots 2 more shots into this wolf. The last one hits it right in the center of the chest, and a chunk of fur and flesh breaks off on the side and falls on the grass. And that's when this wolf drops the calf and starts walking away, not in distress, walking away toward where it came from. The rancher goes, we can't let this wounded gigantic wolf just walk away. They get another rifle and decide to go, he and his son go chasing it. They don't have any problem chasing it because the tracks, it's really heavy. I mean, it had come up, the back had come up to the middle of this guy's chest, he had described it as. They're following it through the brush, following the tracks, catching a glimpse of it, comes out to a clearing out there by the water where it is. The tracks go right out into the middle of this clearing, and poof, this thing is gone. It's just gone, as if it had just evaporated. That's their first day. He goes walking back to the family thinking, what are we going to tell mom and the daughter and dad? And they found this piece of fur and picked it up, and it was like it had been rotten meat. It had been out in the sun for a couple of weeks. Day one. They tried to move beyond that, but this whatever the intelligence was really started messing with them. It did some other things that John and I can tell you about too, and things that happened when NIDS got there that just went off the charts. But it was an intelligence. It was real. There were hundreds and hundreds of incidents that were documented on that property and on neighboring properties and on the Indian reservation. And this piece of property, it's like an island of private property surrounded by the Ute reservation. The Utes took NIDS and those guys a long time to get the confidence of the tribe to talk about it, but they had their own stories about that cursed land, and they would not go there. It was not a forbidden zone, but they advised that the Ute members should not go there because of all the weird stuff they'd seen over the years. Well, Bigelow and John go to that property. They meet the rancher. The family is pretty messed up. They bought the ranch on the spot that very same day, and they sent a NIDS team in, and that basically was a cone of silence that they put over that property. Scientists were there, PhD level folks, very qualified people, and for the next 7 years they spent almost all the time on the property. They had cameras and sensors and things of that sort, and whatever they did, this phenomena was always one step ahead. It messed with these guys at every step of the way. It defied. They were hunting the Skinwalker, in essence, because that was the legend from the Ute tribe. They had called that ridge, that sandstone ridge, that's the path of the Skinwalker. And I remember I heard that term the first time I visited the property. Because of my friendship with John and Col and Bigelow, they would tell me this stuff, and it drove me crazy because I couldn't report about it. So for 7 years, I heard these stories until I finally talked him into letting me go on the property. And that was the day I met Junior Hicks, the science teacher. And he said, oh yeah, that ridge there, that's Skinwalker Ridge. That's the path of the Skinwalker. Skinwalker? What the hell is that? And in Native American lore, it is a shapeshifter. It's an evil presence, a sorcerer. In order to become a Skinwalker, you had to kill somebody in your family. When we started trying to research Skinwalkers for the book that Colin and I wrote, we couldn't get anybody to talk about it. The Utes wouldn't talk about it, the Navajo, the Hopi. Nobody wanted to mention Skinwalkers because mentioning it, invoking the name, invites it into your world, and they took it very seriously. You want to take it from there?
Yeah, well, one of the things you reminded me of something, and that's the impact of serendipity in all of us. You mentioned how Bob called you, and same thing happened to me. I had first met him very briefly at a conference in MIT. Some of you may know John Mack, and he was holding a conference there on abduction phenomena. I happened to be, he was there very briefly, but my second career was at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I was living in Santa Fe, and I was just holding it was over a weekend, had a number of people, some he's mentioned, I think Jacques was there, Hal Putoff, and some of the names that you'll know, and we were talking about where would we go with this. All of a sudden, Sunday morning, we're getting ready to take people to the airport in Albuquerque, and the phone rings, and it's Bob, and he goes, I've heard about you. Is there anything you might be interested in doing? And it's kind of the rest is history. Some of this had come because of a project we can talk about, which you had mentioned, the FOIA, I had run an interagency group on what we called advanced theoretical physics. And the reason for that name, it was really UFOs, but FOIA had just come out and people were, what they didn't expect when they put out FOIA for the first year or so, half of the inquiries that came in regarded UFOs, and that's not at all what the intent of the law was. The intent of the law was so you could get information on things that the government doing. So they were kind of totally shocked there. Well, let me cover one of the things because of what happens later with OSAP and that. One of the things I'll mention is that I had run this interagency project and looking at things, and one that's in the article, high speed, there was something that had happened when you say maybe it's Chinese or foreign. In 1957, we had an incident in which a plane rolled in. It was at Lakenheath and was vectored out. It was an American pilot, and they were sent out in an F-86, and he says, "Where am I going?" He says, "You'll know it if you see it." And what they see is a craft the size of an aircraft carrier floating over the UK. And he goes to roll in on it, and in 2 seconds, this had gone off the radar, which is a distance of over 250 miles. And it meant it transited that, which is over Mach 500, which is one of the articles. So we had seen basically everything that the OSAP program as far as physical capabilities, instant acceleration, high G turns that would be unsurvivable under normal process. And if you looked at what they came up with, we had known that, but it didn't go anywhere. I had eventually tried to, if you remember SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, I finally had briefed many generals and whatnot, moving up the food chain, very high level, and I did end up with the director, deputy director of all the three-letter agencies that you know about, some you don't. Just getting over it, but we wanted to transition now to, okay, let's make this a formal project. And SDI at the time was the biggest program in the Department of Defense, about $5 billion. And because it was the biggest program, it was also a target for everybody who was looking for money. One of the things used to get me, I had worked in the Pentagon, and people say, I'm going to go find the money, like money grows on trees or in pots. When you say I'm going to find the money, it means I'm going to raid somebody else's program and take theirs. Anyway, we had talked to Jim Abrams. It was interesting, when we first started, I started with UFOs 101. By the way, I had representatives from the other agencies with me and started into it, and a few minutes in, well, wait, who are you guys really? And we went back around and identified the agencies and all of that, and clearly had no idea what we were talking about at background. So we get done, and he says, as a fighter pilot, you kind of got my interest. I've heard of some of these things, but I can't touch it. And he says, I'm doing some hairy stuff now in the physical arena. If I get caught doing research in this area, I'm going to get skewered. People are going to come, and he did lose $1 billion. But the point was, this was unacceptable, from a political perspective because of the potential threat to the programs, even though it was an area of potential interest. Now, an individual who's also on the NIDS board, whom I brought along, was Dean Judd. Kept his name protected for a while. Dean had been the technical director of SDI, and he was later the NIO for science and technology, meaning he was at the pinnacle of where science and technology came together. The point was, by the way, the intelligence community was built differently than it is now. DNI, as you know, Defense National Intelligence, didn't exist. That came after 9/11. But you did have an organization that was required to collate information, because you couldn't go to the president and say, well, CIA thinks this, but DIA thinks that. You had to have a unified position. His was science and technology. He knew space structures inside out. So when you hear these rumors about SDI was really to fight ET, total nonsense. Another problem that we're discussing, some of these things get so bizarre. I mean, you know, a number of them, if had I heard it initially, I go, no, that can't possibly be true. And yet what we did see at the ranch, some of these things happen. As you mentioned, the level, we had PhD level folks who were on the NIDS staff, and the science board is literally world class. And seeing things and reporting on things firsthand. That's why the subtitle of my book is Firsthand Experience with Things That Can't Happen But Did, and certainly they happened there. Do you want to do the calf?
Yeah, I'll do a couple of examples of, so there were several things. You got to figure scientists, you know, PhD level scientists, do they want to be there studying some lady whose groceries went back in the bag or his hairbrush is missing from the bathroom, poltergeist type effects, Bigfoot creatures, which were seen on the property, strange animals, animal mutilations. It was as if every kind of paranormal, supernatural weirdness stuff that you can think of was all in one place, all mixed in one bag. As if whatever intelligence was operating there was had a learning curve for the people involved, that these are all related somehow. It's up to you to figure it out. A couple of things that happened on the property later caught the attention of the US government, and I'll tell you what they were. The ranchers saw, for example, a couple of times a hole in the sky would appear. Here, it's dusk. On the other side of that hole, it's afternoon, and he'd see things coming in and out. It's like another reality was there. There was a time when the NIDS guys were there on the property. It's night in the middle homestead. Two scientists are on the ground. Two other guys are up on top of the ridge with infrared. They're looking down in the middle homestead, and they warned the two guys through a walkie-talkie, hey, there's something in front of you. There's a light. There's a fuzzy snowball that's floating just like 2 feet off the ground. It's right in front of you. These guys are having a hard time seeing it, but finally spot it. The guys with the infrared said, this light is getting bigger, and it gets big. It gets like 8 or 9 feet long, and it's a tunnel, and they said something is coming through the tunnel. It was like this big, dark, humanoid creature was crawling through this tunnel. And it climbed out and stood up. It's like 8 feet tall. When it climbed out, the tunnel collapsed back into a snowball. This thing starts heading up the hill with these guys are up there watching it, and they got the hell out of there. That caught the attention of the US government later. There was another one where a PhD physicist that we know and a PhD biologists are walking in the middle homestead. They had a couple of dogs. They would use dogs as like biosensors because the dogs could sense things. They could sense something that was amiss before the humans would notice it. Dogs suddenly get behind their legs and are hiding and are scared by something. And they look up in the trees, there's a copse of trees, and this big black cloud thing was moving. And it got a little bit bigger. And they're watching it, and suddenly the physicist freezes, and a voice comes out of him that's not his, and it's like, we're watching you. I don't know if it's in your
telepathic.
Yeah. And it really messed this guy up for a while. The other incident I want to tell you about that did get government attention is this calf incident. So after NIDS had been on the property for a while, whatever this intelligence is, it does not like being hunted. So it becomes more elusive. It goes underground. The number of incidents starts declining. That's why I was allowed to go on the property. They thought maybe my inherent weirdness quotient might set something off and get it going. Or also they thought if I did a story about it, maybe they'd find another place like Skinwalker that they could go study. So that's why I was allowed to go. And I went on the property the first time, and they used me as bait. They put me out in this middle homestead where this thing had happened. They put a microphone on me like this and a radiation detector and gave me a walkie-talkie. Here, sit here, and let's see what happens. And they went a couple of hundred yards away and then watched through binoculars. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, UFOs, yeah, come on, I'd like to see one. Orbs, I'm fine with that. But there had also been this predator-type creature that had been there that scared the hell out of people. And this is where cattle had been carved up, and a lot of really bad things had happened there. And I'd like to tell you that I was perfectly brave and not thinking anything about it, but that's not exactly true. I'm thinking, I really don't want the predator creature to show up here. The only thing that came to get me was mosquitoes. But in these same areas, these strange things had happened, and everyone was on edge about it. So the rancher had lost a bunch of cattle, and there came a time when the animals on the property were all scared. They're hiding, the dogs wouldn't come out. Everything was quiet, and they knew something was up. And so the rancher was determined he's not gonna lose another cow or a bull. They hear a noise, it's at night. He jumps in his truck, grabs his rifle, and goes peeling off. 2 NIDS guys go after him to see where he's going and what's going on. The rancher gets down, it's in the first homestead, not that far from where they live. And he jumps out of the truck, there's this tree, and at the bottom of this tree is this big brown thing, like a big fat beach ball of a bear at the bottom, and then up in the tree are 2 giant eyeballs, 2 big yellow eyeballs, like this big, like reptilian eyeballs, or some kind of gigantic bird or something. The rancher takes a shot at the thing at the bottom of the tree, boom, hits it, poof, it goes away. Then he starts shooting at the thing in the tree, and he hits that, and something falls out of the tree. There's a little patch of snow at the bottom of the tree, and it left a track. And it's like a giant raptor, like a big dinosaur or bird or something, and then whatever it was went off into the bushes. The rancher comes up to it, sees that thing. The NIDS guys come just a little bit behind him, get some video of it, and then they go off into the bushes looking for this thing, which is just crazy to me. But you know, those things made it into this book that Colum and I wrote. It was after the activity at the property had nosedived to the point where they didn't mind anymore us putting out the story, so we did. 2005, that book comes out, and a couple of guys who work for the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, which is the CIA for the Pentagon, saw it and read it and thought it was interesting. And one of them took it to Iraq. They had passed it around in the green zone. All the intel guys who were over in Iraq at the height of those hostilities were reading it, were kind of interested. They come back, and this DIA guy writes to Robert Bigelow and says, hey, I'm kind of interested in that ranch. Can I visit it? He flies out to Las Vegas. They go to the ranch themselves. Within 45 minutes of him being on the property, he has his own experience. This guy is a rocket scientist. He's got 2 PhDs. He's a brilliant guy with a great career for the DIA. He has an experience inside the ranch house. Something appears where only he can see it. They're sitting around in the ranch house with the rancher and Bigelow and the rancher's wife, and this thing appears right in this room, and only he can see it. And he's wondering, is this some kind of a trick that they're pulling something on me? He doesn't say anything until they leave the property. Then he told Bigelow what he had seen, and he drew it. And it was like, remember the Mike Oldfield Tubular Bells, the Exorcist theme, that album, that sort of figure 8 tube thing? That's what he saw in the room floating there. He was so impressed, he goes back to Washington. He draws up an outline for a program because they were interested in that hole in the sky and things coming in and out and what looked to be some sort of a portal of some sort, the tunnel, whether there's weapons potential there, who the adversary is who might control this technology, and whether or not we can duplicate it. So he outlines this program. He pitches it to Harry Reid. Harry Reid takes it to his 2 closest compadres in the Senate, Senator Stevens of Alaska, a Republican, Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, a Democrat. They said, yeah, let's do it. Let's investigate UFOs. So they did. They authorized $22 million. You guys all heard that as ATIP. The New York Times did this story in December of 2017. They said $22 million went to ATIP. No, it didn't. It went to OSAP. And that program, that contract was put out, and Robert Bigelow got it. Because I know those guys, I was allowed to know a little bit about it. I couldn't report it. I couldn't report it for 10 years until after the New York Times story breaks in December 2017 and gets it wrong. And they say the money went to something called ATIP, which actually came later. Sorry about the acronyms. It's a smaller program that came later after the money for OSAP went away. But they were trying to figure out the technology. How do we create portals like that? Are there machines that can do this? Can we duplicate that technology? They used Skinwalker Ranch as a living laboratory for this program. They hired 50 full-time investigators, which is amazing. They hired that many people in 6 months, got them all clearances. They expected to be able to get some materials from crashes, metamaterials, strange stuff that we've been hearing about in the news. They never did get it. But that program became the basis for all the UFO news that you're hearing right now. If that program had not existed, there would be no ATIP, no Tic Tac incident, none of the news about AARO, none of this stuff would have happened without a study by the DAA of Skinwalker Ranch. Anyway, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, the problem we have, this stuff gets so bizarre that it's very, very difficult to believe. One of the things that you started on, though, and as he knows, I come down against the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Not because the events don't happen, but because that explanation is just too simple. Little gray guys from Zeta Reticuli coming in, and it just doesn't make sense. Words, what you say, cryptozoology, or looking at ultra-terrestrials, things like, why is it that we talk about the ETs, i.e. it's going to be, because one of our first questions that we all had was, where do they come from, with the assumption that they fly in. Now, what we mentioned is that there have been reports of interactions between humans and sentient non-humans throughout the entirety of human history and in every culture. But they happen to fly in little tin cans is a fairly new wrinkle to that. But because of the physical reality and our sensor systems started picking up, that was a reasonable place to look. My view, we're looking at, when you start looking at these things, the possibility we're talking interdimensional, that something is close and come in, temporal, i.e. we shifts in time is available, spiritual, in all spiritual doctrines you hear about entities. I've done a lot of work in post-mortem communication. By the way, the people working now on making that technical, you have mediums who are presenting information. People are now working on are there technical means so that can be done. But it's very, like I say, it just gets to be mind-boggling. And I think the fundamental issue is the starting belief system. Everybody here, I think, went to school that's based on a Western system that's purely materialistic. It says, as you know, we've spent billions and billions of dollars looking for the God particle. The assumption is that we can get down to some fundamental particle that becomes the building block for everything after that, as opposed to consciousness. And you go back to Max Planck, which was about a century ago, and the German physicist talking about consciousness, saying consciousness is fundamental. You can't get beyond or below consciousness. We tend to think in the West are taught that consciousness arises from the brain and thought out, as opposed to maybe the material arises from consciousness. Now, when you get in and start talking in the scientific community, you can understand why you have problems. But when you start talking about the kinds of cases that George and that we saw at Skinwalker Ranch, if I can, I'd like to go into Chris Bledsoe for just a minute, just to show you some other things, and this is ongoing. A few years ago, had heard about a phenomenal UFO case. This is an individual who's at 2008, goes down on the Cape Fear River in December, and they're going to go fishing. And it's going to be in the afternoon. He builds a big fire and has a few friends with him, and he says, I'm going to go back up to the truck, which is a short distance away. And he goes up there and he sees two huge UFOs kind of shimmering, and lots of things happen. By the way, the whole story takes hours to go into with the complexity of the issue. Shorten it quite a bit. He comes back and this huge fire is now embers. The truck has been moved and they're going, where are you? What happened? And he thinks, well, maybe 20 minutes has elapsed. And he says, no, it's been hours and you've disappeared. His son's gone off and been chased by creepy crawlers. They get really scared, throw all the fishing gear in the car. UFOs, others come in and they see them landing on the other side of the river, and they go zipping back to the house. And they lived on a place that was about 5 acres. at the time. He sees something peering in the window. And he goes out, so he goes outside and chases them. The dogs are barking, and this thing starts chasing him. And he's running down, he gets to this tree and finally surrenders. He says, okay, you got me. And he gets this telepathic message, oh, you don't understand, we're here to help. And about that time, Chris Jr. comes in, entity, whatever this was, disappears. Doesn't know what to do with that. So the next day, about noon, he's working and he goes, damn, I haven't taken my medicine. And he had had fairly severe Crohn's disease for more than 12 years before that and has never taken another pill since. And there's all kinds of healings that go on with it. Fast forward. This is where the Orbs come into it and the communication. This case continues to this day. I get videos from him where he's going out in the yard and seems to be having telepathic communication with them, can call orbs, and this stuff's all recorded. One of the most interesting one was, I was living in Vegas and I called him, it was late afternoon. He goes outside with the camera and is taking, and he sees orbs floating around. By the way, lots of video on this. And what's interesting about it is he has the phone on and the camera so you can hear us talking, so you know that this is ongoing in real time. Haven't had a video from him in maybe a week, but these kinds of things. And the basic premise is that there is some form of communication or trying to attempt to communicate in some ways. And what we seem to be missing is, quote, the Rosetta Stone. How do we understand it? This also applies to Skinwalker Ranch and what Brandon Fugel just gave a long thing. And he says, with all the things that are happening there, they believe that there is some form of attempt at communication. We just certainly don't understand it.
So we're talking about a lot of different phenomena, and I'm sure it's maybe too much to absorb all at once, but we're trying to condense it so you sort of get an idea of what our world is like. UFOs are suddenly semi-respectable for people to study. Scientists are looking at it. Reporters are covering it. It's still, there's a lot of stigma involved, but it's come a long way in a short amount of time. These other phenomena, not nearly as respectable, and I'm using air quotes around all of that, but it seems like the lessons from Skinwalker, some of the other kinds of research that are going on, are telling us that they're somehow all related. Consciousness seems to be the common denominator for all that. It's worth noting that Robert Bigelow, our mutual friend, the guy who spent more money investigating UFOs than any person in the history of the world, has now changed his focus. He's not done with UFOs, he's just not financing it anymore. His focus is entirely on consciousness. And I think that's where this topic is headed.
Now, we're going to have to transition to Q&A here pretty quick, but I'd like to quote, this is the final words of my UFO book on here, and that is, it is, in the end, it is clear that the universe is far more complex than we can ever imagine. We are not close to solving the enigmas of UFOs, but rather on the front end of defining the fundamental issues and boundaries. So, we'll go to Q&A now, I guess.
Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel John Alexander and George Knapp. As promised, it's Q&A time. This is going to be good.
John, you mentioned incidents with Christopher Bloodsoe that you personally witnessed with a UFO. Could you describe that, please?
Sorry, I didn't mention the corollary to the one with Chris Bloodsoe. So a few years later, he had... I had heard this story. My wife and I on visit and spent a few days, so we went back down to the Cape Fear River. So we came back up to the car. It's getting early evening, just turning dusk, and my wife and Emily are in the back of the seat, and Chris and I are leaning against the thing, and he's pointing, well, this happened over here, this happened over there. And all of a sudden he goes, oh, I think they're here. And within just a few seconds, the thing pops into view and goes zipping off. And probably the most appreciate that, the most dramatic setting that I had. And the point is, that happened to me. That's when I said, whoa, this stuff is, there is something real. But that's with Chris. Of course, I'd seen the Skinwalker before that, but that's the point of, personal examples. And to this day, he thinks he can call them in. And by the way, I should mention his book. He's got a new one out called UFO of God. And in the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, we're in the last segment of that one.
Hi, I had a question for George. Can you offer any more information on the sightings that happened in Las Vegas a few months ago, where they said they saw the 3 tall, et cetera? Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what we reported. So I get these kind of things, I get reports like that almost every day. What made this one different is the police responded and took it very seriously. And there were some video clips that seemed to be related. So I had reached out to the family. They actually had reached out to us. They wanted to talk to me because I'm a UFO guy in Las Vegas. So I reached out to them. Hey, I'm coming out to interview you. Great. Knock on the door. They don't answer. This happened 3 times. I said, the hell with it after the 3rd time, and I did a story on it anyway. But we had the the video of this thing flying over, this meteor, big blue object that had been captured on a police body cam. And that incident seemingly triggered this family. They were out in their backyard, and they were freaked out. This is genuine. I think they were not making it up. I think they saw something that really scared them. Maybe the presence of the meteor set this off, but they thought they saw a couple of 10-foot tall aliens in their backyard, one of which was trying to messing with a front loader, as if it was trying to figure out how to work this backhoe thing or something. And they go rushing into the house, and they're a really religious family. They start praying, and they're praying for whatever this evil thing is to go away. And then they start hearing these footsteps on their roof, pop, 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 pop. And they're really freaking out now. So they call the cops, and we got the recordings of the police. The police came out. By that time, the body cam video, the story of that body cam video is floating around on the police grapevine. So the police are kind of on edge, taking this seriously. The video of, if you've seen the video of them approaching us, it's kind of hilarious. They're kind of making jokes about it, but going out in the backyard, whatever it was that was there, they didn't see it. But they start asking neighbors. They come back. 2 sergeants come back the next day. Then somebody else comes back a couple days after that, and they put a special surveillance camera on the roof of this house. They thought it was real. They thought something was going on, and they wanted to have video if it came back. Now, we subsequently, after the 3rd time after they turned me down for the interview, I'm standing in the front door, I figured, oh, I'm going to look into this a little bit more. We had done the story just straightforward. Here's what the police did. Here's the video. Here's this thing that flew over the house. But we looked into it further. They had a video from a zoom cam, the ring cam, of a sound, a really weird sound about what they said was the meteor. Turns out that ring cam video was from another part of the valley and had been a month earlier. They said they found a circle in their backyard where the craft had set down. Well, we went back in Google Cam. That circle had been there for a year. It was not caused by that incident. As for the meteor that flew over, it was real. A lot of people saw it, and it's on video. But that thing flew over. It had to, if it came to Earth at all, it's hundreds of miles away. It just zoomed over the city. So while the story does not add up, and hundreds of people have sent me their own freeze frames of what they think are aliens in the backyard, I don't see them. So I don't mind that we did the story. I think the family was being honest. I don't think they had aliens in their backyard.
For one thing you should be aware of, George has a podcast that he does called Weaponized, the Weaponized podcast, and he has many, many interviews on there, and I'd recommend that you take a look. You'll hear many of these stories, and particularly with the one with Grush, where they got to interview. And by the way, if you look at the hearings that took place, and Grush was the guy who was getting these fantastic stories. If the camera pulls back a little bit, if you look over his right shoulder, there's George in Washington in the front row.
It was a pretty cool moment.
So I have 2 questions. The first one, whatever happened to the family? They live in the ranch.
They moved. When Bigelow went in, he wanted the rancher to stay there. The rancher wanted his family off, and they moved somewhere else. But he kept the rancher on the property for some months because the rancher didn't want to give up. I mean, he initially thought it was the government pulling these tricks, trying to get him off of his property. He wanted to solve this mystery. He had shot at these things in the sky and had many other encounters, too numerous for me to go into here. They left. So there's a phenomenon that's come to be known as hitchhikers. Whatever it is that's there on this property can like attach itself to you. And when the family moved, they moved to another state. They left altogether. It followed them. And they had some other instances there. During the OSAP study, the DIA study of the ranch, they sent several intelligence agents to the property to see what would happen, just kind of poke the bear. All of them, well, there were 5. All 5 of them had experiences that were very dramatic, and all 5 of those took it home with them. There was one who was like a female James Bond, really experienced, had been in combat, tough as nails. She had a bad time at the ranch. She goes home. She walks in the door of her apartment, and a wine bottle flew across the room from this wine rack and smashed on this wall. They started having orbs inside their home. Her roommate was her fiance. This went on for months. He finally broke off the engagement and moved out. One of the other guys who was there, he had been at the DIA. He had worked for Office of Naval Intelligence. He ended up being he had many other jobs. I won't go into a lot of the details because I don't want to identify him, but he went on the property. He was with these couple other guys. They're packing weapons, which often on the ranch, the things that happen the most dramatic are to people who go in there with sort of an attitude, I'm not afraid of this, I'll show you, I've been to combat, I'm tough. They get it the worst. And these 3 were walking down the middle homestead, and the temperature drops like 30 degrees, and they see this big dark spot right in front of them, and they feel a presence that's telling them they're not welcome there, and they're like frozen, and they start backing up. They all took it home. This guy gets home. He doesn't see it at his house. He's on the East Coast, but his family starts seeing it. So his wife is doing dishes, looking out the window into their yard, and there is a wolf standing on 2 legs, leaning on a tree like this, like, hey, what's that? She's rubbing her eyes, doesn't want to tell anybody about this, can't be. The next day, her kids are in the living room, looking in the same direction through a picture window and see the same thing. They start screaming, Mom, Mom, there's a wolf in the yard. And they all go look at it, and it starts taking off down the road, running on 2 legs, kicking up leaves. A wolf on 2 legs, 6 feet tall. And they start having orbs in the house. They wake up at night, and there's big, tall, shadowy, humanoid, dark figures at the foot of their bed. Same kind of things that had happened to the family on the ranch. This went on for 10 years. This guy moved to another state, left his 2 sons in this house. It's still happening in this house. He and his wife moved to a different state, and it started happening there. It's now 12 years later.
By the way, in your book, he has the pseudonym of Axelrod, which, if you know some of the stuff with Ingo Swann and that, and we were at a conference together in Huntsville, Alabama, and then this guy started telling me the story. I said, "Are you Axelrod?" And he goes, "Yeah." But right, he had now retired, but it had followed him. And
we wrote a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. So I'm not trying to hawk a book. It doesn't matter to me. That's the story of the OSAP program. It's a follow-up to Hunt for the Skinwalker, but it's about the program that drew out of that first book. And it took us 14 months to get approval through a process called DOPSR. The Pentagon they cut out a bunch of stuff and names. We had to change names and locations for a lot of the incidents that happened. But all those people were real legitimate intelligence guys who've had high-level security clearances, and this weird stuff happened to them. They don't know what to make of it, you know. They call it the Hitchhiker Effect.
By the way, I'll hawk your book for you. You got a new one coming out. You've got a title?
I don't know what it is yet. I don't know what the title is yet, but it's coming.
You've got one coming out next week or so.
Huh? In a month, yeah.
Okay, the second question is, within your perception, is there like a higher power or God or a good entity that can deal with this bad energy or this weird universe?
You know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. We might see some incident as bad energy. We don't know what's on the other side of it, what their intent is, what their time frame is, what their agenda is, if it's even a they. I put it this way, you know, as a UFO reporter, I hear this every day, and John does too, in social media. We can handle the truth. We deserve the truth. Be careful what you wish for, because we don't exactly know what the truth is. We don't know what the entity is. We think we're ready to know that it's ETs visiting us from other planets, because that's what we've been led to believe. And science fiction and movies and TV, we're comfortable with that. But what if it's something else? I mean, there's a guy named Charles Fort, for whom Fortean research is named. He coined a phrase that he thought we were property, that Earth belongs to somebody else, that we're not dealing with an alien invasion. Something else lives here. It's been here longer than us. It's their planet, not ours. And I don't know how people would react to that. You know, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's related to a higher power. I don't know anybody who knows the answers to any of this stuff. It's a really exciting time for this kind of research to see if all these different things fit together. Do aliens have a God? Do they think that there's an afterlife? Consciousness might be the connection that allows us to answer those kind of things. Don't know.
Thank you. So why is there a change in the narrative? It certainly feels like, you know, we went from deny to now they're doing 3 congressional hearings that we know about.
My opinion is it's been forced on them. I think right now we're going through the pushback phase. So we had a lot of progress for 5.5 years, and now there's pushback, and you see signs of it. But it's not a program. I know UFO world that I inhabit, we see conspiracies and everything. So why are they doing that? What are they up to, releasing all this now? It was forced on them. That OSAP program was kept secret, and they produced 100 different reports that if you stacked them all up would be taller than I am. Not one page of that has been made public. We know that ATIP existed as a smaller version afterward. That became a story. And because they had video, and because the New York Times did the story, it looked like the paper of record made it respectable for media to cover it. And because other media started digging into it, 60 Minutes, for gosh sakes, the UFO story, it gave Congress some cover. I can tell you right now, Harry Reid, so I was going to break that story for the New York Times. When I knew it was coming out, I said, hey, God damn it, I've sat on this thing for 10 years. Why do they get to do it? Well, Harry Reid gently told me, because they're the New York Times and you're not, you know. I accepted that, but he said, look, after they do this story, break it, I'll give you the first interview. So we did. And that first interview, 2 days later, his phone had been ringing off the hook with other senators, members of Congress, calling him saying, what's the deal on this program? Well, how can I get in on it? I want to know more. So they started having these closed-door hearings, first for Senate staff members, Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, hearing from the witnesses, and then members of Congress started demanding to get in these meetings. Suddenly they became the most popular thing on Capitol Hill, and it's like the only bipartisan issue in Washington. It's Republicans and Democrats both interested in it. That hearing that John mentioned, it was astonishing. There's AOC and Jamie Raskin on one side, and there's Matt Gaetz and Tim Burchett on the other, arch conservatives, far left liberals, and they're all digging it. They're asking good questions, and they're all on board with it. The fact that the media changed, it gave Congress cover. That meant academics like Avi Loeb at Harvard trepidatedly walked into these waters and dipped his toes and found out you can study this stuff and not be eviscerated, obliterated, your reputation destroyed. You can be good scientists and dig into this stuff. And it just started snowballing. And then you got whistleblowers like David Grush coming forward. He was assigned a job to check out these special access programs. The head of the UAP task force, a guy named Jay Stratton, said, look, you've got the clearances, go into these stovepipe programs, special access programs, the things that are off the books. Is it true that we got crashed saucers, that we're doing reverse engineering, that somebody's got alien bodies stashed somewhere? Let's find out. Dave Grush spent 14 months looking into it. He had more than 40 witnesses that he says he interviewed, that they all had clearances. He got their names and information, the programs they worked on. He gave that to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. That Inspector General issued a report saying we find this to be timely and credible, and then he went to Congress and told his story. I don't know that everything he says is true. I don't know that he knows whether it's true, but those names of those witnesses have come forward to, at least behind the scenes, to Congress and to the Inspector General. I hope that we all get to learn more, but it's not a plot. It started snowballing and coming from a bunch of different places, and they were mutually supportive interests there that got it going.
Let me address timing. You know, the times have changed dramatically. As you know, when NIDS was formed, Bob and I went and we were dealing with a congressman trying to get congressional hearings. And I looked at the guy and said, "Can you take a 20-point hit in the polls?" And he said, "Yes." By the way, he's since been removed. But the point was that this was not always popular. Claiborne Pell was a friend of mine who was interested in these areas. He was a senator from Rhode Island, and he once attended a MUFON conference that happened to be held in Washington. That literally followed him to his grave. If you look up the obituary in the Washington Post, it literally says, you know, senator, he one of the oldest senators in there of all this. In there it says, you know, this crazy guy went to a UFO conference, and, you know, believe it. And so it was a very strong negative for a very long time, and it is a major shift that's happened just in the last 20, 30 years that you can even talk about it.
Harry Reid was my friend for almost most of his career. I had to do some tough stories on him, but we had this ongoing dialogue about UFOs. And every time I'd interview him about something, he and I would go off to the side and talk about flying saucers and Skinwalker Ranch. He called me from the floor of the Senate one time, "Hold for Harry Reid." I'm thinking, oh man, this has got to be big here. What's going on? What kind of scoop is he going to give me? He says, "George, I want to send some of my staff to Skinwalker, and they're scared to go. Can you talk to them a minute?" And I'm hearing him. He's on the floor of the Senate, in the well of the Senate. Mitch McConnell is bitching about something in the background. And I'm thinking, this is what Harry Reid called me about? But as brave as he was in initiating that program and talking to me, and eventually talking to the New York Times, he never did that for 30 years. He knew that he would take a hit too. So he didn't do it until the very end of his career, come out of the UFO closet. Now it's a little bit easier. I hope it continues. Yes, sir.
In the back here. Sir, I'll come up to you next.
Sorry.
Well, I believe everything you say, and here's why. October 31st, 2009 at 10:34 p.m., I had a flying saucer in my yard for over 15 minutes, and it beamed my arm. And that's not what's so amazing. What's amazing is 2 months later, a vision while I was awake, standing up, went into my head, and all of a sudden I'm over the Korean Peninsula, and it was all black, all ash, and there was nuclear war. That is a true story. My friends know it. I've seen 2 flying saucers and a whole bunch of other vehicles. But aside from that, I do have a question. It's kind of a fun question.
Wait. Did
Yes.
you get video of this thing in your yard?
It was late at night. I left my BlackBerry in my truck, and yeah. So, no.
Those things happened. I know. People don't want to believe it.
But I saw the vehicle up close. It was made of metal, and I also believe it was man-made. It was only about this thick, and it was the size of a big truck. And it was a Walcott right up where I live, and it had this electrostatic fog around it. I believe the fog was because it was super cold, like dry ice.
Has Walcott had cattle mutilations, by the way?
We had that happen in the early 80s. I've seen a lot of things out there. But my question is kind of a fun question,
Okay.
because I've always wondered, when you take your dog to the park, you're in a vehicle, and you let your dog out of the vehicle, and your dog's your friend. Is Bigfoot maybe somebody's pet? That's what I want to know.
I'm here to tell you. So here is a fact of life. UFO people don't like Bigfoot people, and vice versa. And the ghost hunters hate all of them. And you get the cattle mutilation people, they all don't get along. They have their own stovepipes, and they hate each other. And they are reluctantly being forced to acknowledge that sometimes Bigfoot is seen in proximity to UFOs. There's quite a bit of cases like that. And nobody is really comfortable with that, but there are some pretty good cases that prove that it happens. Yeah, maybe it's Fido. Yeah.
Have there been many observations of alien beings, and what do they look like? Do they have a head like us?
I didn't hear it.
Have there been many observations of alien beings? And the answer is yes. I mean, hundreds of different kinds, different types of aliens.
Oh, yeah, that is, in my view, part of the problem of the ETH. You look at the variety, I used to say if all of these things are real, Earth must be on the galactic bucket list of places to visit. Because you have, there's so many varieties of things. And again, if you go back through history, you change. The other one that would bother me is some of these are geographic specific, certain kinds of ETs seeing in one area and another, and you go, does it make any sense that they can traverse the entire universe and come here and have divvied up Earth, like drug dealers, which corner are you going to stand on?
There are so many different kinds that makes you wonder if we've ever seen what they really look like. I mean, you've got these typical grays that people have seen. They used to be called little green men. That was primarily because of an incident in Kelly Hopkinsville in Kentucky. This family, it's a famous case, they started seeing these little green aliens out. It was like it's a shooting gallery out in front of their house, and they started shooting at them, popping them over, and they'd hit them, and these aliens go down and pop right back up and start walking again. This incident is so preposterous, and sometimes incidents like this happen. They're so preposterous that no one would believe them, almost as if they're preposterous on purpose. There's a famous case, the Pascagoula incident. This guy, Calvin Parker, was one of the two fishermen in Pascagoula, Mississippi. They're out at night, and suddenly they see these weird lights and these big robot-looking things with three big, they don't have any necks. They look like Gort from The Day the Earth Stood Still. And they got these three big protrusions, no eyes, no mouths, and they're floating across the grass, like 2 feet above the grass, and took them on board these spaceships. Nobody's ever seen those again, something like that. There are cases where really credible people believe that they see owls or big-eyed beings, big-eyed frogs, things of that sort, but something's messing with their head. It's an image that's put into their head that makes them look like that, screen memories, things of that sort. So the shapes are so different that you have to wonder, are we seeing the variety pack, or are they all really that much different, or do they change their shapes in our heads?
Yeah. But we also, it looks like they have a capability of manipulating time and space. Yeah. But not only physically that, but the ability to manipulate the perception of what the individuals are receiving. So you don't know if what's being perceived is necessarily what's there. I mean, we're in science fiction land now, but this does seem to fit the observations that have been seen.
Hi, so that actually flowed into exactly what I wanted to talk about, is the different races of extraterrestrial beings. I feel like so far we talked about a lot of more fear-based, but I do believe, and I wonder if you believe, that there's all different types of entities. And honestly, I believe that they have assisted us from the beginning, watching a lot of professors and archaeologists on Gaia TV, what you were speaking on about Turkey, the new development that they're uncovering right now. Ancient Egypt, Indonesia, and these places that are just phenomenal, that I believe we were supported and co-created with other beings.
Entirely possible. So we don't know for sure. And as John and I have tried to communicate tonight, there's probably more than one answer, that it's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers. Jacques Vallée said the first time I interviewed him, he said, look, if you can manipulate space-time as we have seen these craft do many, many times, you could be from all those things. You could be extraterrestrial and interdimensional and a time traveler, all the above, and then something else that we haven't even figured out yet. I think there probably are extraterrestrials that have visited us. There's a document, there was a chapter in a textbook that the Air Force had at the Air Force Academy in the 1960s, and they were teaching their best and brightest pilots, future Joint Chiefs of Staff type officers, the best that the Air Force had. They had a chapter on UFOs, and in this chapter it said, we think it's likely that you might see one of these in the course of your career as a pilot. We think the best evidence suggests they've been around for 50,000 years, and we think at least 3 or 4 different races have been visiting us. So yeah, there could be more than one answer, and there could be more than one agenda too. So some might be helping, and some might not.
Yes.
I can't tell you which ones are which, though.
There's certainly not going to be one simple answer.
Yeah.
And my second question is, are you familiar with the Galactic Federation of Light?
I've heard those stories,
Okay.
you know, and I don't know, I don't know. You have to try to keep an open mind, I try to keep an open mind.
My question is really on a global scale. What's happened in Utah, I'm sure it's happened all around the world, and what happened in Lakenheath. Are countries coming together to have some kind of a, big meeting about everything now that it's coming out? Is it because it's more friendly to speak about these days, where you don't get booed off the stage for thinking like this?
How other countries are handling it.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Actually, we've been relatively slow in releasing information. There's many other countries that have released documents. And I think it's going to accelerate, but it's taken a while to have a kind of a shift in, is this okay to talk about? And when we talked before about being career enhancing, that the press and the military, one of the things I wanted to come back to that you had mentioned, this had to do with Terry and the ranch. Yeah, they left, but they were ostracized by their community. The same with Chris Bledsoe at home. They're to this day taking heat. The local people really don't want to hear these strange stories. So you have a huge difference between a group like this who's obviously interested, or you wouldn't be here, to the general public, and some of them is overt hostility.
Our military is being dragged kicking and screaming into talking about this, into pretending that they're studying it, into pretending that they want transparency. They use that word all the time. They're full of crap. They don't really want transparency. They want this to go away. And they're only going along with this because Congress and media are making them, and the public is, put a lot of pressure on them. They don't want to talk about this, and they don't want to study it. They want somebody else to deal with it. And the US government has a lot of influence with our allies. Canada, the Five Eyes nations, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, they take their cues from us on this, and none of them have really been very forthright about it. But other countries, not as closely aligned with the US, have come forward and released stuff. Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador. I got thousands of pages of documents from Russia. There was a brief window of opportunity in the early 90s when glasnost and perestroika existed, and the Russians wanted to be welcomed by the rest of the world, and we were able to go over there and get a bunch of stuff about their UFO program, which was gigantic. That window is closed now, of course, things have changed, but people are interested in this all over the world.
Well, looking forward to the next 5.
The time is up. Well, I'd like to close with a reality check. And but again, from the military perspective, some of the things you don't know, and this is kind of near and dear to me, we just finished or came out of the global war on terror. And what most of you don't realize is we had people involved in combat more than 3 times the extent of anybody in World War II. The other issue I would start is with a number, and it's 32,781,679,138,123. If you don't know what that is, sometime today our national debt went through that. So the issue is, when you say, should the government be involved, this is a finite thing. The budgets are a zero-sum game. And so if they're going to be involved in this, you say, what are you not going to do? It's very, very easy to say this would be interesting, we ought to do that, and the government ought to be involved in a period of fiscal austerity that I think we're going to be in. We may have the a government shutdown over these issues. But that's the flip side of it. So it's one to talk about these wild and wonderful things, and boy, we ought to be having more involvement. The other is, can you afford it?
I'd like the public to stay involved and keep the pedal to the metal and keep Congress interested. The government doesn't have to pay for it, but get out of the way, because they've got a lot of stuff.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Knapp and Colonel John Alexander.